Welcome to tonight's forum with teacher and education activist Nathan Gibbs Bowling. And this gathering is put on by the Evening and Weekend Studies program at Evergreen. And so lots of courses and programs are here tonight, as well as community members that are joining us for this event. I'm Sarah Ryan. I'm an Evergreen grad. I came back to Evergreen when I was in my late 30s. And I have taught labor studies here for 20 years, and I'm currently serving as Dean of Evening and Weekend Studies in summer school. And I will be passing that honor on next year. First, I want to acknowledge this special place that we're in. The Longhouse Education and Cultural Center is a house of welcome, and it's a public service center that serves the tribes and the Native American communities of the Northwest. So it's a gathering place, especially for arts and culture. And this summer, they'll be hosting an international Native artists gathering in August with people from all over the world. Enjoy the collection of art that's here. Don't smoke in the building or right outside. If you have to smoke, there's a smoking shack in front of the carving studio. So you go out the front door and to the left, and there's restrooms in the back. Tonight we're gathering students and community members for a conversation with Nathan called Teaching and Learning in Dangerous Times, a conversation worthy of the moment. We call this event a liberal arts forum, not implying that we're all liberals or that we're all artists, but taking seriously the democratic and civic purposes behind higher education, public higher education, seriously. And we gather our learning communities and use a variety of lenses to look at a topic of consequence. We've invited a series of authors and activists and public intellectuals for the last few years, starting with Sasha Abramsky, who is author of The American Way of Poverty. Some of you will have been here when Robert Egger, the founder of the DC Central Kitchen and the LA Kitchen, spoke. Last year, we hosted Stephanie Kuntz, emeritus faculty member at Evergreen, for a conversation on her book and her work on the history of American families called The Way We Never Were, American Families in the Nostalgia Trap. So this year we're focusing on public education as we confront dangerous times with Nathan Gibbs Bowling. We claim him proudly as a double Evergreen grad, but I think we should be most honored by what he brings to the college, not what the college gave to him. And the same with all of you. You're all a gift. You bring your experience, your perspectives, and as you know in your class, a whole lot of knowledge to the conversation. In thinking about teaching and learning in dangerous times, we're not just thinking about ourselves right here as a college community, but about our own children, grandchildren, and community members. How many of you have family members, children, grandchildren, other extended family currently in the K-12 schools now? Yeah, fair amount. Evergreen's programs serve what we call the new majority in higher education. So it's ironic, but a majority of college students these days are labeled non-traditional. And you're mostly among them. And so this is a quiz, little test. Count the ways the National Center for Educational Statistics has 7 characteristics of non-traditional students. So I'd like you to count how many you personally have. So there'll be one. First one is delays enrollment, does not enter college in the same calendar year that you finished high school. So one finger for that. Attends part-time for at least part of the academic year. The third is works full-time, 35 or more hours a week while enrolled. The fourth is considered financially independent. In other words, you're not supported by the family that raised you financially. 5 is you have dependents other than a spouse, usually children, but sometimes others. 6 is you're a single parent, either not married or married but separated with dependents. And 7 does not have a traditional high school diploma, but completed high school with a GED or other high school completion. So clap if you have all 7. Okay, how about 6 of the 7? Whoa. Okay, how about 5? How about 4? How about 3? 2? Or 1? Okay, so we've got, a vast majority. You're considered highly non-traditional if you have 4 or so. So welcome to the family of highly non-traditional students. And Evening and Weekend Studies program is organized for you. As Dean, I want to hear about your experiences, and I always want to hear your review of our program. And our mission is to serve students from all walks of life, especially those who have family, work, and other commitments, with interdisciplinary theme-based classes and rich opportunities for hands-on learning. And I hope we do that. You can, in the back, we are outreach coordinator. If you're interested in coming to school at Evergreen and you're not currently a student, we have catalogs for evening and weekend studies, and we have a presentation from the 3 master's programs, one of which Nathan graduated from the Master's in Teaching program. So now I'm going to pass it on to Ken Tabbitt, who is our provost. That's the academic vice president or academic leader of the college. And he's been a faculty member here since 1993. He's a geologist and an amazing photographer as well. And he's going to introduce Nathan.
Good evening. I hope the fire marshal doesn't come by. I think we're above capacity. This is the fullest I've seen this part of the Longhouse in a long time. What a great event. Let's see if I can move this. Maybe I'll just hunch over like this. Maybe that's easier. So I'm not an Evergreen grad. I think I'm the only one up here who's not an Evergreen grad. I apologize. But it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Evening and Weekend Studies Liberal Arts Forum and the speaker, Nathan Gibbs Bowling. But before I do, I want to say a few words about the Evening and Weekend Studies program. And I promise to be brief because, like you, I didn't come here to listen to the provost speak. The Evening Weekend Studies program is an integral part of Evergreen and Evergreen State College, as is our Tacoma program, as is our graduate programs and our res-based program. The Evening Weekend Studies program provides a liberal education framed on the values of the college. So integration, interdisciplinary collaboration, engagement, self-reflection, equity, and social justice. So the value of a liberal arts education has been questioned, and those questions will probably persist. But the skills and abilities that are the hallmark of a liberal education, particularly in Evergreen education, such as problem solving, communication, creative and critical thinking, synthesis, are what are needed to contribute as an engaged citizen, are foundations of a productive career. They allow you to create change, and they make your life more fulfilling. I think that the polarization of our population that we see today, in large part, is a product of a failed education system. Education, that's primary, secondary, and higher education. They need reform, and they need public support. I'm speaking specifically to the evening and weekend students who are currently enrolled, but I applaud you for continuing to pursue an education. So it's a real privilege for me to welcome and introduce Nathan. As Sarah mentioned, Nathan is an alumni of the Tacoma program. He's also an alumni of Evergreen's Masters in Teaching program. He's taught at Lincoln High School for 11 years. Nathan received the Milken Family Foundation National Teaching Award. He was the Washington State Teacher of the Year and one of 4 finalists for the National Teacher of the Year. This year he was also awarded the Joseph Albert Deere Distinguished Alumni Award from Evergreen. And when he isn't accepting awards, when he's not doing that, he blogs and speaks on teaching and educational equity issues. He's also the co-founder of the Teachers United, which is an educational policy advocacy group, which is needed now more than ever. And so it's my real pleasure to welcome and introduce Nathan Gibbs Bowling. Thank you very much.
You said the clicker is the clicker? Go. All right, go ahead. Good evening. Oh, no. Hold on. Good evening.
Good evening.
There we go. Microphone. Can y'all hear me over there? Okay, good. Not do that. That's fine.
Okay. There we go.
I have slides, but are they?
Yeah, they're
Okay.
ready.
I gotta say, I am freaking out right now, and I'll be 100% honest with you. Hearing that bio be read, I'm not a professional presenter. I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm a high school teacher. And I live and teach in my neighborhood where I live in Tacoma, Washington. And walking in today, I have to say, some of y'all up front saw it, I almost lost my mind because some of my students who had me in high school came out to see me. And then I walk over here, and some folks who I went to college with who are current educators today came out to see this evening. And so I right now am just honored to be here, and I just want to kind of tell you what's up. I'm one of you. When we sat there and counted off the things, I had 4. Okay? I went to the Evergreen Tacoma campus and graduated in 2004. I was the youngest person on campus, and I had an amazing experience on campus. For those who don't know the Tacoma program, it's not quite like Olympia. The campus is filled with this beautiful love and full of these amazing black women. I basically went to college with 100 Oprahs. And they cared for me. They tried to take care of me. I worked my way through college working at UPS. I worked that crazy 3 in the morning shift that Biggie rapped about.
Yeah.
So I would get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, go work at UPS for 6 hours, come home, put food in the crock pot, day sleep, wake up, do my work, and then go to school. And in the evening, they'd see me and they would be like, "Baby, are you okay? Babe, are you eating? Are you taking care of yourself?" And I'm like, yes, ma'am, I'm taking care of myself, And so many grandmothers tried to introduce their granddaughters. It was an absolute crazy experience. Oh, okay. So only for the recording. And I don't know if it's working, but I'm good either way. Whatever, fine. And so I say that because I want to talk to you not as a speaker. You're fine. I want to talk to you not as a speaker, but as a peer and a teacher. Because the work in the moment right now is super important. And the stakes for my students, the stakes for all students, particularly at high poverty schools, are life or death. And I don't say that as a euphemism or a rhetorical flair, but children who emerge from the public education system without the necessary skills to survive in life are doomed. They're doomed to mass incarceration. They're doomed to low job expectancy, low pay. They're doomed to short life expectancy, and they're doomed to premature death. I'm a teacher, but I've spoken at 6 funerals in my career. And so I take that mantle of teaching, I take it very seriously, and I want to talk to you today about my story, my classroom, and where I want all of us as a learning community to go today. First, my biases and my known blind spots. One of the things that frustrates me is when people won't own like their flaws and won't own the privileges they have. And so if you'll give me a moment and indulge me. I'm a native-born, English-speaking, heterosexual, Christian male. And so right there gives me all sorts of privilege that I understand. I'm college educated. I grew up with a mother who loved and cared for me and a stepfather that was always there. I was able to enlist in the military and use my military career to fund my education. I understand I have a lot of privilege. I've traveled. I have a passport. I think I'm pretty damn handsome. I have a lot of privilege. Okay? I want to own that. I want to own that. I also want to stand here and say to you, like, I understand Evergreen and I understand Olympia. And so some of the things that are true about me is I'm actually probably a little less radical than a lot of you. When I was an undergrad in community college, I was vice president of the College Republicans. I'm a veteran. Right? I lost a couple of you right there. I lost a couple of you like, what? Who's this guy? I'm a veteran. I like reading David Brooks. I think David Brooks has a lot more to say about America right now in this moment than Krugman and a lot of writers on the left. I'm a gun owner. I'm a church attender. I understand that I will never know what it's like to be somebody who is not sure about their sexuality. I understand that I have no idea what it's like to have the burden of being a woman and dealing with sexism and heteronormativity and all sorts of other isms that like, we can get into right now, but like you know the isms. I will never know what it's like to walk around in a country and not be able to speak the language and communicate and be marginalized because of that. That's not my story. But what I can say is working at Lincoln High School, I have my finger on the pulse of those communities. I work at this really, really amazing school. It's this thing called integrated. That isn't really happening in schools nowadays. My school is, from year to year, fluctuates 20% black, 20% white, 20% Hispanic Latino, 20% Asian, mainly Southeast Asian, Vietnamese, Cambodian, and then 20% mixed race, or, so that last piece is mixed race, Pacific Islander, and then our First Nations people. I also work at a high school that is about 80% students of poverty, or students of low income, but also has a graduation rate of about 86%. And so like all your narratives about what's possible in school and what school looks like, my building takes and goes, the hell with that, let's go. And that's why it brings me so much joy to stand here and see Cassie and Caesar here, because they put up with me for 4 years. But they know that that 4 years was a labor of love. I want to start today by talking about something that's kind of got me concerned about discourse in American politics. Right now, there's a lot of talk about a lack of civility. We need to be more civil. We need to promote civility. But my concern about conversations about civility is that I oftentimes feel that civility is a code word, which basically means we need to speak in a dominant white language. I also feel like civility is often a term that people who have power and privilege use in order to marginalize and shut up people who lack power and privilege. And so we look at organizations and go, well, why can't they be more civil? And what I would say to you is that like, how dare we question civility of people who are fighting for their life and their breath? And so I think about this often, and particularly in this election. Like, since election day, I've had an anonymous egg or deplorable on Twitter basically call me a nigger once a week. However, I need to be more civil. So I wonder right now in this political moment about calls for civility. I also wonder in this moment about calls and complaints about things being political. Like, I teach government class. There's a lot going on in government class. A lot of political conversations. Essentially, my kids walk in every day now, and I'm like, provocative question. Headline. Primary source. Question. Discuss. Right. Good day. See you tomorrow. The class teaches itself. But a lot of people are saying, like, well, we can't be political. I'm going to argue to you that a lot of things that people call political aren't political at all. They're matters of life and death justice. Me saying that law enforcement in America should not kill 1,100 people per year is not a political statement. Me saying that Black Lives Matter is not a political statement. It's a matter of justice. Me saying immigrant rights are human rights is not a political statement, it's a matter of justice. And so I'm kind of concerned that like in America we're walking up to this precipice about like, oh, I need to be apolitical, I need to be neutral. Like I'll quote Howard Zinn and Evergreen, which is a really basic stuff to do, but like you can't be neutral in living training. And I would rather, follow me on this, I would rather live in a society that is uncivil but just. Y'all know where I'm going, right? Than live in a society that is civil and unjust. And one of my concerns about our society today, and one of my concerns about like where we're going is that there's a lot of talk about we need to be more civil, be more civil, be more civil. But I feel like be more civil means marginalized populations need to take it and like it. And so I want to put that on your heart, put that in your head today. The idea that, again, I would rather have perfect justice and tolerate incivility than perfect civility and then tolerate injustice. You hear me now? All right. I want to back up a spell, though. And I want to talk about kind of like my life and how I got here. So, I went into teaching because I like the anonymity. I like the idea that basically you show up at school on the first day of school, you have 125 students, you kind of win them over, and then there's no like selling yourself for the next 9 months. And then the next year, a group of kids come to the building, you have a reputation, you have their sister, then their brother, so like you're familiar with the family, and there's like no sales involved. My life blew up last year. I wrote a blog post, and it was called The Conversation I'm Tired of Not Having. And it was about school segregation and about kind of justice matters in America. And like, I had no idea where this was going. It was one of those things where I wrote it and then went to bed. And then woke up to like 220 notifications. And then finally I was like, oh, this is a big deal. Okay. And so that blog post will be published in the Washington Post. And just time out. For me, as someone who barely graduated high school and like slid through, went to community college, went to Evergreen, and back to Evergreen again, the Washington Post, I was like, oh, dang. It was in the Huffington Post, which is, like, whatever, they post some bullish, right? It was in the Hettinger Report, which is like a edu-wonk kind of thing. And by the way, their comment section, fam, never read the comments. Anyway. And then the one that got me, and the one that I was like, was The Guardian. Thank you, whoever that was. Exactly. Yes, you understand. Thank you. In that blog post, I laid out three core truths that I believe from my experience, and I want to leave with you today about schools, and then we can kind of figure out how to reverse engineer this and go forward. Those core truths are these. 1, our kids. Our kids. And when I say our kids, I mean kids of color and kids of poverty go to inferior, poorly funded, less well-staffed schools, and this is by societal design. Essentially, what has happened is that we have said that a certain population, based on their racial makeup, their ethnicity, their zip code, their economic wealth, their geography, is not worth investing in, or we're going to invest as little as we have to in order to meet basic civil rights laws. Children of color go to schools that are less well-funded. They have teachers who have been in the profession less time. The number that's always in my head is the city of Seattle and Seattle schools. Rainier Beach High School is the Lincoln High School of Seattle. It's the low-income, highly diverse high school. The average teacher at Rainier Beach has been there for under 5 years. Roosevelt High School is not the Rainier Beach. It's the wealthier high school. The average teacher at Roosevelt High School has been there for about 15 years. Now, I'm not saying that longevity is a proxy for quality, but I am saying I'm a hell of a lot better now than I was in year 4. But what we get is that low-income schools, we get constant teacher churn, and basically our neediest kids get our least experienced educators, and that harms them, pushes them further behind. One of my policy passions is the number one factor impacting student achievement within the school is the effectiveness of the teacher in the classroom. And I put that on me. If my students aren't learning, that's on me as far as in-school factors go. And so, ideally, every policy mechanism and thing that we should do should be pushing our most effective teachers towards our neediest schools. But that's not what happens. Every incentive for me as a professional is to get the hell out of Lincoln High School and then get to the burbs. If I go to the burbs, my kids are fed, their needs are met. If I call home as a parent there, the pay's probably better. I can be home at 4 instead of 6. And so this is a systemic thing that's happening nationwide across America, and it's not an accident. Like, things like this don't happen in uniform patterns all across the entire country on accident. These are intentional choices. Truth 2. There's no desire or political will or impetus to fix any of this anytime soon. Essentially, through white flight and suburbanization, middle class and wealthy families have surrounded themselves with barriers that keep out the other. And they have no desire to share their money and their resources across district lines. Here's a funny thing, is in Washington State, there's like 200 school districts. Whenever I see a district line, there's a story there. And that story is some community, some group of parents said, I don't want my kids going to school with what? Them. And this is how you get what you have in California. I'm not from the Bay Area, but oh gosh, what's that little city that's inside of Oakland? Fremont? Piedmont. So you have the city of Oakland, California. And like, we know the demographics of Oakland, yes? Okay. Oakland looks like Tacoma campus, yes? Okay. Inside of Oakland, there's a wonderful little enclave of wealthy white families who have their own school district. Whenever you see district boundaries, those boundaries were created to keep somebody else out or keep resources in. We are not in this together as a society. And we're guilty of it here in Washington State. Kids in South King County, kids in Puget Sound, kids in Tacoma, kids in Toppenish, they do not get the resources that middle-class families get on the east side of King County. Has anybody here been to a high school in Bellevue? Okay, high schools in Bellevue look like the sets of Disney Channel shows. I'm not lying. I remember the first time I went to an AP conference in Bellevue, I was like, damn. Like, I see how the other half lives. Why? Because their property values are higher. And so what they do is they tax themselves and use that revenue to fund their kids through local revenue. And so what happens is that other kids go without. Which leads me to 3. All teachers are not created equal. Again, if you believe my starting premise, that the most important factor within a school impacting student achievement is the effectiveness of the teacher in the classroom, then we should be undergoing whatever efforts we can to get our most effective teachers and from our neediest students. But that's not what we do as a society. As you can imagine, this last one got me in trouble with some folks in my union. But that's okay, because I ain't scared. Here's the thing. I hit publish on this blog post, and everything kind of blew up. I got a letter back in the mail, and some folks have heard about this letter. Is that Steve's laugh I heard? Hello, Steven. I got a letter from from a lawyer in New York. And basically, he laid out all the reasons why everything I was saying was crazy. And in this letter, he says, black students are lazy. White parents don't want their children around black children because they're a bad influence. And like, he put this on Wax Fam, like on his letterhead. Sent this as a letter to me at my school. And it ended basically with, Mr. Bowling, please stop blaming white people for the failures of the race. What I would say to you right now is the plight of my students and the plight of my community is not a failure of my race. It's a failure of America. And it's a failure of America to live up to its founding values. I did an interview Monday night, and we were talking about, like, what's one thing you believe in that, like, people laugh at you for believing in? And I said the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution has 2 clauses in it that I fundamentally believe in. 1, a guarantee to equal protection under the law, and 2, a guarantee to due process. And if we look at all the factors in society today, we look at education, we look at mass incarceration, we look at what's happening in Flint, we look at what's happening with prison sentences, we look at school budgets. I tell you right now that we do not have equal protection under the law. And these problems go back to birth. These aren't like, things kind of tumble along. These are problems that go all the way back to people's births and origins and places they are. This is my home. I don't live here now, but I grew up in this house. My mother was born in El Dorado, Arkansas in 1940. My father, rest in peace, was born in Laurel, Mississippi in 1930. And in the 1960s, for reasons you can probably guess, they got the hell out of the South. My father was stationed at Fort Lewis. My mother's brother was stationed at McCoy Air Force Base. My uncle told my mother life was better here. And then, so basically the family moved up in like classic African-American chain migration. I teach geography, so it's like geography stuff, whatever, fine. This is the house my parents were shown, where my family was shown. This is Tacoma's Hilltop neighborhood. It's a beautiful, beautiful, like 1918 craftsman. Like, I'm not like one of those housing nerds, but like, I'm not gonna lie, it's a cute house. 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, about 2,000 square feet, whatever. This is the house I was born in. I was born in this house because my family was steered to this house by real estate agents. And when my family was steered to this house, we were shown this house, and this house right now, if you trust Zillow, goes for about $270,000. So that sounds fabulous, but hold on. Let me tell you about my friend Abby. This is my friend Abby's house. Abby's family moved to Tacoma in about 1960. And they were shown this house in North Tacoma. Different neighborhood. 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, about 2,000 square feet. Basically a very, very similar house. Abby's family, her mother, same job as my mom, she was a nurse. My family was not shown this house in this neighborhood because people who look like me weren't allowed to live in that neighborhood. Can we follow that? So this is an example of some of the intergenerational injustice that has been done to families and communities that reverberates through the work we do today. Abby's house basically is on the market right now for about $380,000 to $400,000. Think about what are some of the things that Abby's family would be able to do with an extra $170,000 they did nothing to earn. Okay, remember the beginning I mentioned I'm a teacher, right? Okay, so speaker mode off. Turn and talk to your parents. What are some things that that family could do with an extra $170,000? Go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. By the way, that's some teacher voodoo right there. The 3 thank yous. Actually, be quiet. Anyway. What are some things that Abby's family could be able to do with $170,000 that they did nothing to earn? Please.
Pay for college.
Pay for college. She went to Wazoo debt-free. Please.
Invest it in compound interest.
Invest it in compound interest. What are some other things her family could do?
Get health care benefits.
Pay for health care benefits. What are some other things? Please.
Pay off old debt or high interest debt.
Pay off old high-interest debt. Please.
Renovate or improve upon the house.
Renovate and improve upon the house. Man, y'all are good at this. Way over there after the beer.
Get their children transportation so they can get a job.
Get their children transportation, they get a job. Please.
Or they can just like donate the extra money to an organization to fight inequality.
Could have been. No shade intended, right? Like Abby's fam, like no shade intended. Please.
Buy a house in an area that's currently getting gentrified, like built up.
Mm-hmm. And then have a rental property, they can get like sources of income, right? Go.
Down payment on a car.
Down payment on a car, please.
Private school.
Private school. Come on now, private school. And so that private school, what would be the purpose and interest of that private school?
Those make sure that their kids don't go with the other.
You understand this. Your hands up.
Go on vacation.
Interesting. After graduation, Abby went on a tour of Europe, and I went off to basic training for the military. Please, last one. Say you guys say louder than that. Open a business. So we understand this. Like, this is how inequality is built. The only way you can erase this kind of inequality is through education. But our kids that need education are going to the schools that are least equipped. Real estate is a cause of the inequality, and then the perpetuation of real estate policies create more inequality. And the situation you get is something like this. I was blown away the first time I saw a map like this. This is a red line map. This is a red line map of the city of Tacoma. Somebody in the front, can you please read, what does it say for the green?
Best.
Best. Those are the best neighborhoods. The best neighborhoods. And so you could not get a home loan if you were an African American in the best neighborhoods. Thank you. Can somebody please read what the blue says?
Still desirable.
Still desirable. It's not the best, but it's still desirable. Can somebody read what the gold says?
Definitely declining.
Definitely declining. And then the red.
Hazardous.
Hazardous. Hazardous. Hazardous. The house that I grew up in, that 4-bedroom craftsman I showed you, that home that I love, where my mother lives today, hazardous. The neighborhood where I live today, on the east side of Tacoma, where my students live, hazardous. The neighborhood where my school is, where I ride to every day, will walk to every, I'm lying, I drive. Drive to every day. A beautiful straight out of Harry Potter 1913 brick building looks right up campus of Oxford. Hazardous. Here's the thing. When they were talking about hazardous, they were talking about like investment potential and like the likelihood of default on loans. But what they really mean is life itself. People living in those red communities have shorter life expectancies. Their kids are less likely to graduate high school. They have inferior access to transportation. They live in food deserts. And the thing is y'all, that map isn't natural. This happened in a uniform pattern across the country in every urban area in America as a matter of government policy at the state, local, and national level. One of the most important reads of my adult life is a book called Living Apart. Write this down. Living Apart. It's an e-book. You can read it in like a weekend. It's by a lady who's a reporter for the New York Times, who, like, when she followed me on Twitter, made my life. Nicole Hannah Jones. And so in the book, she talks about the Fair Housing Act and how America basically said on paper, we're going to desegregate, we're going to have fair housing, and then basically over time walked away from it and allowed housing to resegregate. And y'all, I'm not a genius, I'm not, but if we go to neighborhood schools as kids, and we live in segregated housing, then we're going to have what? We're going to have what? And the idea that we walked away from housing integration and then kind of backed into school segregation, y'all, that's not an accident, that's planned. I'm not conspiratorial, I'm factual. Like, it's documented. The craziest thing about the book Living Apart is, the hero of the book is George Romney. George Romney was Mitt Romney's father, and was Nixon's HUD secretary. And George Romney was a hero of integration. And that demonstrates to me something that I talk about in my classroom a lot, is how like politics and dynamics, how we think like left and right, like these things go back and forth all the time. So I know everybody in the room can't see this. Can I get somebody from the front row to kind of shout out across the top? What does that say, please?
Academic achievement and socioeconomic status. U.S. School Districts 2009-2013.
So this is a graph of academic achievement versus familial wealth. Every school district in America over a 4-year period. If we look at the x-axis running that way, we see poor and disadvantaged to affluent advantage. And on the y-axis, we see average achievement, grade level. Take a moment to look at that. And then one more time, please. Please turn to talk to your neighbor and tell your neighbor what you see. Go. See, proximity works. See, magical. Thank you. Thank you. Could somebody, just a few people shout out, what do you see up there? Towards me, 100 meters on hand. Go. It makes a lot of sense to you, like a linear line almost. Somebody else, what do you see? Please.
I see two kind of bell curves on a scatter plot. So it's generally pretty similar across the board, but when you get to the extremes, it's a little pigeonhole.
Whoever taught you stats right now was like, bell curve, scatter plot, yay! What do you see? I got you once. Let me go. What do you see?
Looking at it, and I am in stats in this board, by the way. So,
What's your muscles? Go ahead.
I see the bulk of it sitting right at middle class, is what it's telling me.
The bulk of students are in the middle class.
As you move out of your standard deviation,
Ooh, you're fancy.
you get more concentrated on the higher end and more wide dispersion outliers on the poverty level, which means that as you move out, they're like separated in poverty.
I want to paraphrase from the side of the room. He said basically everything's clustered in the middle, and then as you move out a couple of standard deviations, you get more outliers. And the outliers are what I want to talk about. Because the first time I saw this graph, I was like, oh, wait a minute. This is a fait accompli. Poor kids, poor schools, rich kids, rich schools. And I was like, ah. But then I looked at it and I was like, no. If I had my pointer right now, what are those? What are those? What are those? Those are the schools that are making a difference. Those are the schools that are helping kids beat the odds. Those are the schools that are taking low-income kids, kids of poverty, kids of color, and getting them where they need to be. The education conversation in America should be, what the hell is happening there, and how can we bring it to scale? But that's not the conversation we're having. Trust me, I spent the last year visiting and talking to policymakers. Last week I was in DC at the Aspen Institute talking about this. That's not the conversation they're having. What they want to talk about is choice. What they want to talk about is vouchers. But here's the deal, is every one of those schools that's above the 0 line, but to the left, is a public school or a public district. And so we know what it takes. We know what needs to be done. We know what practices need to happen, but the question is do we have the political will? I'll tell you this. One of the greatest moments of my year this year was the Teacher of the Year Gala. It's like adult prom. And so along the back row, you have my friend Sean Sheehan, the Oklahoma Teacher of the Year. He ran for state senate this year. Unfortunately, he lost. It's a shame for Oklahoma. Next to him, you have Tim. He's the Nebraska Teacher of the Year, the loudest talker I've ever encountered in my entire life. I was in the park one day and I was like, hey man. Anyway, next to him is Daniel, the California Teacher of the Year, and in front of us are a few of our partners, including my amazing wife and fellow teacher, Hope. It's time for my wife. I'll see you tomorrow. So this was at the Ronald Reagan Federal Building in May, and it was one of the most meaningful events of my professional career. Secretary of Education John King stood at the dais and talked about equity. And he talked about what we need to do in order to fix and turn around education and how we should make equity a priority going forward. And I nodded my head and I was like, you damn right, John King, you know what we need to do. And I sat there in my bow tie, and then afterwards we went to the movie theater in our fancy clothes and saw Civil War, and a bunch of us fell asleep at midnight, but whatever. It was an amazing, amazing night in the Ronald Reagan Federal Building in Washington, D.C. One of the more depressing nights of my life was election night. And so hear me on this. Hear me on this. I want to be very careful about my language here. I want to be very careful about my language here. There are people in here who are conservative and voted for Donald Trump, and I am not mad at you at all. What I am mad about is policies. And one of the things that people on the left has done for the last 20 years is that we've created demagogues out of conservatives. And in response, they gave us an actual demagogue. I'm going to argue that the vast majority of you would probably trade somebody who knows left arm to have George Bush I back in the White House right now. And a bunch of you are looking at Ronald Reagan and going, he's not so bad. Hell, in my classroom, I showed Reagan's speech from the RNC in '74, and my students are like, who's that? I vote for him. He's dead. He's dead. But the most amazing part of that speech is Ronald Reagan says, we have to stop talking about each other and to each other. And that's what I want to finish with and kind of leave you with, is how politically can we stop talking about each other and to each other. One of the things I've done is the word racist has gone off my vocabulary. I will not call somebody a racist. What I will say is the policies that you support have a disproportionate impact on communities of color. Because the second I say you're a racist, dialogue is over. Right? Nobody goes, you're a racist. You know what? You're right. That has never happened on humanity. And so I won't do that anymore. I won't do that. What I want to do is I want to have focused conversation with people about policies. Because what we've done is we've created these polarized lines in society, and we don't talk across these lines. Me, I'm a college-educated, coastal, urbanite in the Northwest. Man, I was born with the Atlantic magazine in my hand, right? How am I going to dialogue and discourse with people of good persuasion and convince them that they need to help me and support my issues if I all spend all my time demagoguing them and calling them racist? And I'll tell you what, when this really became clear to me and really became important was 2 days after Election Day when the real racists showed up. This is Richard Spencer. This is Richard Spencer speaking where? He's speaking in the Ronald Reagan Federal Building where I had just had my gala and the Secretary of Education said, we're going to work on equity. And he stands there and he spikes the electoral football on behalf of Nazism and says, "Hail victory." I took German in middle school. I may have been born yesterday, but I stayed up all night, and I know that "Hail victory" translates to Sieg Heil. We have to figure out how we can reach across party lines and make allies, because this is the real enemy. My enemy isn't my conservative ex-cop neighbor who likes to walk around with no shirt on and is kind of weird. My enemy is not the father of my principal boss, who's a banker and loved Ronald Reagan. This is my enemy, and this is the enemy of our country. And what we need to do is we need to figure out how in these dangerous times, how in this life and death struggle, and I'm not exaggerating this right now, in a life and death struggle about what America is going to be, how do we unite? How do we bring our moderate Republican brethren into the conversation? How do we motivate conservative, moderate senators like Lindsey Graham and Susan Collins and Rand Paul and John McCain to make hard votes? It's not going to happen through being a demagogue. It's not going to happen through memes. It's not going to happen through like really, really witty quips on Twitter. It's going to happen through hard conversations. And you all and me, as greeners, as a community of learners, it's going to have to start with us. Because us on the left, like, we're not blame-free in this. We've helped create these conditions, and only in changing our behaviors can we fix them. Thank you.
So we know you're itching to dialogue with Nathan some more, and first we're going to ask you to talk with each other for a little while. So if my ushers will come up, there are some really smart people that came here tonight, some in your program and some that you don't know. And so what we're going to do is the ushers will come up to the very front, and we're going to take row 1 and turn it around to face row 2. And then we'll turn row 3 around to face row 4. And you'll form a small group with the people just opposite you. If you're in the bleachers, you'll have to do your best. And we do have some chairs that people who are standing in the back can come and get that are up in the front. There are a few up here in the front and, in the corners. And the most important thing is come up with a group question for Nathan, and he'll be circulating. Okay, thank you. Okay, we want to hear your questions for Nate and discussion. So there are 2 microphones, one on this side of the room and one on that side of the room. And if you want to raise your hand, one of the faculty with the mics will come around and give you the mic, and you can dialogue with Nathan and the rest of the community. So, who's up? Oh,
I'm gonna unwrap
oh
this.
okay.
Yep.
All right.
All right, so now comes the part of the evening where I dodge all the hard questions. And like what I'd like to just say before we start taking questions is that like I'm a high school teacher. Like I have grading in my bag in my car. I studied economics. I don't have all the answers. Only a-holes have all the answers. But the fact that I'm willing to admit I don't have all the answers, I think means I'm on the right path. And so let's start over here. Since the DeVos nomination and appointment confirmation, I've been asked basically that question online about 6 different times. And each time I struggle with like a 140 character answer, or a 280 character answer, or a paragraph answer, because like the answer really varies like based on where you are and your circumstances. What I would say is despite DeVos being confirmed as the most incompetent cabinet officer in American history, education remains a local issue. And schools in America receive between 8 and 18% of their money from the federal government. And so what I would say is that the response is to continue to agitate at the national level about education issues and to oppose DeVos and any things in the Department of Education they try to do in order to defund or cripple our public schools. But on the flip side, there has to be a localized effort to hold our local officials accountable for equity and hold our local officials accountable for positive outcomes for low-income students and kids of color. And again, you can see why this is longer than a 140-character tweet, because it's a two-front strategy. I would say particularly, and I might get in trouble with the room right now on this one, is that the charter school fight is one of the most problematic fights in education, because some of the strongest advocates for charter schools are parents of color whose children are not being served in traditional public schools by a largely middle-class white teaching force. And so I'm not as strongly anti-charter as some folks would like me to be sometimes. See, you got quiet just now, right? But stick with me here. I think if we make the battle line charter, no charter, we're missing the boat. There are highly effective charter schools out there, and there are some really, really crappy charter schools out there. There are highly effective public schools out there, like the one I think I teach at, and there are some public schools that are underfunded, under-resourced, and need help. I would say personally, and here's why I get in trouble, I'm agnostic about school models, but I'm a fundamentalist about results for kids. And so if a model of schools and if a system of schools is getting positive outcomes for marginalized populations, now, one of the things you'll see is that the charter community is actually one of the strongest critics of DeVos, because they understand that poorly run, poorly operated charter schools make their effective charter schools look bad. And that's something we have to keep in mind, is we can't allow our fervor about school model to marginalize potential allies and everything else. For example, Eli Broad of the Broad Foundation down in LA is one of the largest funders nationally of charter schools. Billionaire, kind of eccentric, like has museums, the Broad Foundation. He came out against the DeVos nomination because DeVos has not shown on the record a commitment to holding charter schools accountable. And so one of the largest advocates for charter schools was actually an ally against DeVos. If we make the battle lines charter schools and not quality, then we lose potential allies. Now again, that's longer than a tweet. Next question. Back in 2011, my amazing wife, Hope, over here, and some of my, you about to clap for the, okay, so my amazing wife, Hope, and I, and some teacher friends and I started an organization called Teachers United. And TU is a solutions-oriented, teacher-led advocacy organization that seeks to insert the voice of experienced educators into the policy conversation. Here's what happens with ed policy work.
I remember having this moment where I was like, what in the hell is going on? I looked at like the docket of what the Washington State Legislature had like as their policy priorities. And then I looked at my own practice and thought about like what are the barriers to my kids learning, and there was zero correlation between like what I thought would help my students and what the legislature wanted to do. And it occurred to me that like the legislature is getting an earful from somebody, but they're not getting an earful from teachers. Let me take that one step further, and again, I might get in trouble. Some of the teacher advocates who are out there are better advocates than they are teachers. Okay? And then, stick with me. One of the things I know is that like if you're an effective educator, that's an all-consuming thing. And so the most effective educators are in their classrooms before the bell, during the bell, holding their pee at lunchtime, like running to the copy machine, after school, into the dark, making copies on weekends, going into the building at Sunday when the church is meeting to get stuff done, working over break. Like that's what effective educators are doing. Those are the people that need to be in the policy conversations, but they're too busy teaching to do it. And so what we did is we basically went out, and it's an invitation group, and we identify people we think are effective, impactful educators, and we solicit them, come join us in policy work. And so in the organization today, I'm the director of government relations, which means that I do all the interaction with legislators. We've helped craft legislation. We helped write a bill called House Bill 1345, which is about teacher professional development. And basically what we wanted to do is define the way teachers are trained in Washington State. The purpose of our organization is to take the voice of educators and put them in the policy conversation, because what you have is you have like the angry, frustrated teacher who's hell no to any change, and rightfully so because they feel under attack from the reform community. And you have pie in the sky reformers who are divorced from the classroom and like don't know the implications of the policies they have. And so they're like, well, let's just do this. Let's rate schools A to F, and then people can decide. Well, gee, which schools all get rated F? Our low-income schools, our schools filled with immigrants, our schools filled with students of color. One of the biggest problems with education policy is all we do is talk about outputs, but don't look at the inputs. And so one of my goals with Teachers United is to look at some of the inputs that contribute to the outcomes our students have. And again, the biggest input in school factor is the effectiveness of the teacher in the classroom. And so our policy focus is, what are the policies that we can help create in order to attract, develop, and retain throughout their career effective, passionate educators? Because every high poverty school, every low income school has that first year teacher teaching 5 periods of algebra to all the kids that failed algebra in 8th grade. Those kids need the best, not the newest. Every high school has that person who got hired in October to teach 5 periods of freshman English, I see the heads nodding, to the neediest kids. Those kids deserve the most experienced and most impactful, not the newest. So our locus of policy is, how do we get our most effective in front of our neediest, and how do we keep them there? And so that's the work we do and we advocate for. And so if you're curious about Teachers United, our website is teachersunitedwa.org. Or if you follow me on Twitter at Nate_Bowling, it's all up and down my timeline. The whole bias thing, man, Okay, so here's the deal. There are certain lines, don't step on the microphone cord. There are certain lines that I'm willing to cross and certain lines where I'm like, nah, right? And so what's political versus what's justice? I don't think saying, like I mentioned earlier, that I believe Black Lives Matter is a political statement. I believe that's a matter of justice and fact. I don't believe saying that the prison industrial complex incarcerates young men of color, particularly African-American males, at 14 times as a white male is a political statement. It's a statement of fact. And so I don't tell my students who to vote for. I don't tell my students what party to follow, but I do present facts to them about the world. I kind of play a game with my class, and my students can kind of nod along with this is my kids don't know where I stand. I think most of them think that I'm a frustrated Nixon Republican. And honestly, I might be, I don't know sometimes. But I also don't stand in careful here. I had a teacher who I had in high school who basically preached weak liberal politics at me. And like I resented it. And like one of the reasons why I was a young Republican is like I couldn't stand the Clinton administration in the 90s, and there was no real anything on the left. And so there's nothing really formative on the left, then you go right. And so I don't preach my weak politics at kids. I will say this, I tell my kids this. I believe that Black Lives Matter. I'm a gun owner. I'm a vet. I'm all over the place, right? I've voted for Republicans, and in fact, on this last election, I voted for 2 Republicans. But I can't mess with Trump, right? But when I talk about Trump in my classroom, I don't talk about him from the left, I talk about him from the right. And so what I can do is I can talk about the tradition of the Republican Party and talk about Abraham Lincoln, talk about Eisenhower, talk about, like, I don't know about y'all, but like during the Super Bowl, when George Bush came out in the wheelchair, I'm like, I miss you, George, right? And so I think there's a way that you can talk about Trump and talk about politics from the right and the left, because like, I don't know, we spend a lot of time worrying about bias, but like, not all points of view are valid. Like there's a gentleman back here someplace over here, and we had a disagreement, we were talking in the small groups about like punching Nazis. I said, like jokingly, like, I don't condone punching Nazis, but I'll watch a video on a loop. Okay? Particularly sets of music, by the way. Like, I mentioned to them, there's one where it's like Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA, and it's amazing. It's like, born. But anyway, like, so bias, right? What is the other side of the argument that the Holocaust happened, right? What's the other side of the argument of mass incarceration? What's the other side of the argument of the bombing at Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Like, these are all things that happen. So like, I don't obsess about bias. If I can go back to like what I said before about civility, right? I would rather have justice with bias than like some faux neutrality and injustice. I guess sometimes you have to decide, like, can you persuade a person, right? Like, who is persuadable and who's not? And there are, like, some people, like I don't see a point in being civil with the alt-right. Like, they have a racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, sexist, anti-trans ideology, and there's no point in engaging like and like fighting to be, I'm be civil with you, Richard Spencer, you're okay, right? Like that's for me is either like block on Twitter or disengage completely or stay the hell out of Idaho or, am I lying though? Or, like where's the lie fam? Or watch them get punched on TV, right? Like, so that's kind of and you have to decide, who can you engage, who can you not engage? One of the most meaningful conversations I've had about race this year was with a lady who I met at the Aspen Institute this summer, and she talked about how basically in the lead up to the election, her her grandfather on her husband's side, who's the only remaining grandparent their children have, is a virulent bigot. And she wants her children to have a relationship with their grandfather, right? She wants her children to have a relationship with their grandfather, but she does not want her kids exposed to his bigotry. And so she had to negotiate the space and figure out, like, what am I willing to tolerate? And I can't decide for you what you're willing to tolerate, right? Like, I can't tell you what your line is. We just have to decide for ourselves. And so last week, I was back in D.C. And I met her. And I was like, how are things? And she's like, I haven't spoken to him since Election Day, and he's in the hospital right now, and I don't know what to do. She decided to draw that line, right? Like, we have to do some soul searching, some personal examination, because like, there's no point in sacrificing your sanity and mental health for the struggle, right? Because if in this struggle you lose your soul or lose your mind or you burn out, then like, great, like you've achieved a minor victory, but like you're burnt out and done, right? So like we have to decide what we can do, But like the flip side of that is we can't decide we're only going to do this and say, well, I've done this, I can't, right? And so it's, what are the courageous steps that I can take within my own like sphere of influence? And what are the things that I can do in support and with support of my community in order to affect change? I'll say this, I've made an intentional effort to kind of get out of my bubble, right? So I talked about how I was born with a copy of Atlantic magazine in my hand. I've reached out to a couple of conservative talk radio show hosts and said, I would love to get on the air with your audience and kind of talk about issues in education and talk about political issues. And like, that's kind of a work in progress. My friend Tim from Nebraska Teacher of the Year, he went on Fox Business Channel yesterday to talk about the DeVos nomination. I didn't tell Tim that offer came my way first and I turned it down, right? Because I'm willing to have conversations in person. I'm willing to go on talk radio, but like, I'm not gonna go on Fox. Like, I'm just, that's my hell nah line, right? Right? And so everybody has to figure out, like, what can you do, and then what's your hell nah line? And I'll say this, my hell nah line extends and contracts based on, like, where I am, because I have to take care of myself. I'm accountable to my wife. I'm accountable to my students. I'm accountable to my parents. Like, my mom's 76 years old. Like, there's a finite amount of, like, what I can do without, like, losing myself. So, like, that's not an answer to your question, right? It's not an answer to your question, but, like, this isn't, like, it says a post-inaugural conversation. I don't have an answer, but like I hope that's part of a discussion and like leading you someplace. I just dodged that one like a boss. Well, I think I touched on it a little bit in my conversation in my presentation. Not every Republican is my enemy. And in fact, most Republicans aren't my enemy. One of the things that happened in this election is that a whole bunch of people on the left went, I can't vote for her. And whether that was they were too liberal for her, or they have like internalized sexism, or they don't like the electoral politics in the two-party system, or like whatever your long Facebook rant is, a lot of people on the left side, they can't vote for her. A lot of people on the right went, I can't stand this guy, right? However, of the people who said the Supreme Court was the most important issue for them electorally, 57% voted for Donald Trump. There's a nice fat chunk of Trump voters who like held their nose and voted for him, who aren't really committed to him and his policies. Like for them, it's a single issue gun control abortion thing. I find that one of the things I like to do is if I find somebody and I agree on 70% of the issues, 80% of the issues, screw the other 20, let's build common ground, right? But the left is full of purity politics. Well, you don't believe everything I believe about schools. Well, no, I don't believe everything my wife believes about things. Like, we disagree all the time. But like, hey, whoa, whoa, damn. Really? Anyway, you derailed me completely. That's dirty, baby. That's dirty. There are allies for us in the struggle against Trump's policies on the political right who we need to not demagogue and we need to not marginalize and we need to engage sometimes in their terms. And like sometimes what I have to do when I'm having an argument or like constructing an argument is I have to concede some things that I actually don't believe, right? I'll concede some things I don't believe to create common ground to get them where they need to be to have the conversation on their terms. And so, like, again, I mentioned this earlier on, like, I don't find myself reading a lot of writers on the left right now because they don't have anything new to say, right? I'm reading David Frum in The Atlantic. David Frum was a speechwriter for George W. Bush. He wrote The Axis of Evil speech. He's a conservative Canadian immigrant. He is virulently against Donald Trump. The things he has to say about Trump policies are insightful and brilliant and give me language to communicate with conservative people. David Brooks and George Will. Jesus, George Will in that bow tie, right? Like, has been spewing Reagan values since before I was born. When Trump got the nomination, he registered in Washington, D.C. as an independent for the first time. He left the Republican Party, right? There is common ground to be built with conservatives, but like you're not gonna build that common ground with conservatives by browbeating them with some of our language on the left. We're gonna have to engage them on their terms and concede some of the battles in order to build common ground. I would say this, the Trump administration represents, well, nope, not about the man. The policies of the Trump administration, and see that it's not about the person, the policies. The policies of the Trump administration represent an existential threat to my students. I have Muslim students who are concerned about going on a registry. I have Hispanic Latino students who are concerned about their documentation status or the documentation of their relatives and being deported, losing DACA, losing access to programming. I have female students who essentially the President of the United States has codified sexually assaulting. I have African American students who watched the presidential debate and heard both Donald Trump and Mike Pence say that like stop and frisk is good policy, when we know that stop and frisk introduces black males to contact with law enforcement, and few things good happen when black males come into contact with law enforcement unnecessarily. Okay, all those threats that my students face, I have to be willing to concede some of my pride and some of my issues in order to build common ground with people who oppose those policies. And like, that's hard. That's some 16-year-old me would be like, the hell are you talking about? Concede nothing. And in fact, 25-year-old me who sat in this room in 2004 and watched the Bush-Kerry debate and drop F-bombs the entire time, right, would be like, what are you talking about? But 37-year-old me understands the stakes are too high for pride, right? And so I can't, in my path to like understanding, I can't make enemies of potential allies through demagoguery and through my language. I can't. I can't. Like, the history of America is rife with politicians coming to power and separating working class whites and working class blacks when they both share the same struggle against power and capital. Right? Like the whole immigration thing it's that, right? Working class immigrants versus working class white people like fighting for crumbs off the table. We have to figure out ways to build common cause. And my biggest frustration is my friends on the left who spend all their time talking about how dumb Trump voters are. They're so dumb. They're so dumb. What? Congratulations on being smart. Look what it got you. Right? Like the left has spent the last 16 years talking about rural voters and creating resentment in rural voters. And the rural voters went, you know what? I'm gonna show you, F you, let's go Trump. Those rural voters used to be part of the New Deal coalition. Those rural voters voted for Democrats throughout a lot of the 20th century. We can bring them back. Not only can we bring them back, but we can bring back also those Rockefeller Republicans, those business conservatives who look at Trump and go, man, that xenophobia stuff is kind of crazy and might harm my business. Like there's common cause to be built. What I would say, and I'm going on, but like there's no permanent political coalitions, right? Like if we oppose the policies of the administration, we need to be able to build temporary coalitions that might shift issue to issue with allies to oppose what's going on. And if I have to take the L on something I'm passionate about, on one of my issues, in order to get the W on 3 more, I'm willing to do that. But I would say this, that also means that I'm a pragmatist and an institutionalist and an incrementalist. And I know that like incrementalism isn't really popular with a lot of y'all. Like a lot of, my experience as greeners are like, we want to, let's go. But like not everybody's at your level of consciousness to go with you. Do you feel like I actually answered your question? One of my favorite things that's happened post-election is like the alternative facts and fake news thing. And I'm gonna tell a quick story really fast, and then I'll get to your question. I was at a soccer game with a friend of mine, and basically the referee made a really bad call, and like my friend Grant stands up and goes, "Fake news! Fake news! Fake news!" For a minute. Like, and not only for a minute, for like a moment, but like for a full minute. And it was so uncomfortable, but so hilarious. I'm just like, God bless you, you belligerent fool. One of the problems that has allowed for the rise of alternative facts and fake news is the passive consumption of news through our social media streams. And so in my classroom, I teach media literacy in my government class. And one of the things we talk about is like what sources you rely on and using valid sources. If your news consumption is passive, which means you basically look at what comes to your social media stream, then like you're gonna get things from Occupy Democrats, which, let's be real, is liberal fake news. And you'll get stuff from US Uncut, which is liberal fake news, and you're like, yeah, yeah. But the thing is like, progressives are just as guilty of the fake news thing as the conservatives are as well. And that's not like a false equivalence. Like, I've had too many conversations with too many leftists about vaccinations where I walked away and went, that's not true, right? And so, if we're active in our media consumption and we're going out and seeking our media from valid sources, from reputable sources, then that will help us avoid alternative facts and fake news. You're much better off waking up and opening the Atlantic Magazine, The Economist, the National Journal website, than you are logging on Facebook and Twitter and just taking whatever comes your way. The other thing I would say about like the alternative facts and fake news thing is that the question that I ask in my classroom very often and that I think adults should ask to each other is, how do you know? And so I ask my students all the time, like, well, they say, da-da-da-da. Well, how do you know that? Well, because, but how do you know that, right? And so part of that is that I don't take anybody's word for granted. I don't take my mom's word for granted, to my own detriment sometimes, right? And so it's about triangulation. Okay, the administration is saying this. What is the opposition saying, right? And by the way, you mentioned Kellyanne Conway. Can I just warn the room really fast? There's a lot of like progressives out there who are like, man, she's so dumb. She's not dumb, she's diabolical. She knows exactly what the F she's doing. She's probably the smartest person in the administration. Like, there's this really weird thing in America where we look at women we disagree with and automatically they're dumb, and like, nah, no. And particularly, she worked for Cruz before Trump. And you can go back and look on YouTube at her just putting the knife into Trump when she was working for Cruz. Like, she's not dumb. And so what she's doing with alternative facts is completely intentional. What we have to do is we have to be able to understand that Donald Trump has 7.8 million Twitter followers, whatever god-awful number it is, right? But we have our own networks and communities. And so we need to be able to respond to alternative facts. When the Trump administration says, the media is not covering terrorist attacks, right? We have to be able to respond factually with, yes, they are. And in fact, there's like a 24-minute long CNN interview with Jake Tapper that went up about 2 nights ago, where like he responds point to point to point to point to everything Kellyanne Conway says. But I would say this, the wrong way to go about it is to yell alternative facts at somebody who you're arguing with, right? Like, I'm having a conversation with them. Well, that's not true. Alternative fact, that's fake news. No, how do you know that? How do you know that? Well, the president said it. You take his word for it, right? And so, like, getting back to sourcing and getting back to primary documents. The funny thing is actually everything you learned in 8th grade about sources and, like, primary sources is actually true, right? Like, primary sources actually matter. They actually freaking matter, right? And so what do the primary sources say? How can we share those? How can we elevate those? There are some folks who, like, can't be convinced. And there's some folks who want the alternative facts. And, like, they're not worth investing your time in arguing with. But there are some other people who are less invested in that narrative. You can actually have a conversation with and persuade. And so, like, I'm going to share this. I got in an argument with my brother-in-law on Facebook. My brother-in-law owns the only gun shop in Olympia, Washington. I've bought a firearm from my brother-in-law. I love him. I'm going to see him at Thanksgiving, right? I was on the way to an immigration protest in Tacoma. I'm not going to argue with my brother-in-law because he's not going to change his mind. So he said his piece. I said my piece. He clapped back. I blocked him. Right? Sorry, didn't block, muted him. So, like, he may have said some other stuff. I don't know. I'll find out at Christmas. Okay. Can I say just proud moment? So my former student, here's the thing, right? I wish to God that I was as smart as I thought I was when I was like 21. And I look back on myself as a 37-year-old and say, oh, God, right? And so, like, I would just say, if you believe that your reaction is righteous and just, and you can't take anymore, then, like, do you, boo. But the flip side of that is you have to know that there are consequences with do you, boo, right? Like, telling somebody off feels real good. You're like, ooh, son, I told them, right? But, like, that's not how you build bridges. And so you have to make a decision for yourselves as advocates. Do you want to be right? Or do you want to win? Or do you want to be, I'm not going to say it, don't worry. Do you want to tell somebody off because at the end you're going to feel better about yourself and feel better? Or do you want to engage them in dialogue in order to get to a point of agreement that's somewhere not quite where you wanted to be, but closer than you were before? I think one of the things I learned in an international relations class at Evergreen Tacoma is that business negotiations and diplomacy are different. In business negotiations, you're trying to get the best possible deal for yourself. What's the best possible deal that I can get that's going to be actualizing and edifying to me? Diplomacy is, how can I make the person I'm talking to think they got the best possible deal while simultaneously getting the best possible deal for myself, right? And so a lot of us treat politics like business when politics is actually diplomacy. And so if you're a young person in here and you're righteously angry, then be young and righteously angry. Like, you're young. Why not? Like, be young. Be mad. Do you, boo, right? Great. If you're young and you're not angry, then how can you best couch your arguments in a manner that is going to not turn people off? And if you're older and you had your young phase, you know better, how can you get in conversations with the goal of getting progress instead of a goal of getting chesty and getting right? But don't hear me wrong. Like, is there a place for anger and indignation? Like, absolutely. I just talked about watching videos of Nazis getting punched, right? Like, if I'm standing in Washington, D.C. when Richard Spencer gets punched out by the Nazi and the anarchist wants to run past me, I'm like, and if Spencer's allies want to chase him down, I'm like, right? So, like, there's a place for that. There's a place for that. But, like, I'm 37. Like, every black male in my family died in their mid-60s. I'm halfway there. Like, I don't have time to be angry anymore. I got 30, 40 years in me. Am I going to spend my 30, 40 years building coalitions? My 30, 40 years building bonds? Or am I going to spend my 30, 40 years being right and happy with myself? Right? Like, it's a personal choice. Be angry, right? Like, be angry, but don't stay angry. Because what happens is like, when young folks stay angry, they burn out and they disengage from the cause. You're gonna hate my answer. You're honestly gonna hate my answer. Yeah. This is gonna get really like government classy for a while. Just stick with me here. We live in a system where we don't have proportional representation. We have a plurality winner-take-all system. And so whoever gets the most votes wins all the representation because it's single-member districts, first past the poll. This is, again, 25-year-old me hates this talk, right? Third parties aren't going to work. Because what a third party does is a third party divides the opposition. And so you get the situation where Bill Clinton was elected twice and never got a majority of the vote because conservatives were divided between Ross Perot and George Bush. Or you get Lincoln, who was elected in 1860 with like 38% of the vote because the Democrats were divided between Southern Democrats and the Democrats. You may not like this, and Greeners, I might get booed out of here, but if we're going to engage in electoral politics, you don't create third parties that win elections. You create third parties when major parties collapse. Like the Republican Party came in the 1860s when the Whig Party collapsed. I have a lot of complaints about the Democratic Party, and I don't consider myself to be a Democrat. I'm not a Democrat. But I also understand that the way elections work, once the primary has been settled, I have a choice of voting for a D or an R. I can vote third party, but that third party vote is again making me feel good, right? So in 2000, I voted for the Libertarian candidate, and that felt good because I couldn't vote for Al Gore, right? In 2004, I voted for Cynthia McKinney, the Green Party. Look at me all over the place, right? Because I couldn't vote for John Kerry. Neither of those people came anywhere near winning the office of the presidency. I think it's a fallacy that advocates for third parties think that third parties happen at the national level, and like every 4 years we're like, let's create a movement for a third party and let's win the election, or let's make our political statement. If we're going to win with third parties, we need our third parties working in legislative races. If we're gonna if we're gonna do the third party thing, like it can't be every 4 years, let's get Jill Stein out there and like, woo, Jill Stein. Like, I've seen that dog don't hunt, right? And there's a ton of people in the Washington legislature who ran unopposed. Let's get those third parties in there. Who's your third party county council candidate? Who's your third party candidate for the mayor of the city of Olympia? Who's your third party candidate at the local level? If you want to go third party, like that's the way that's the way it needs to start. And like that's my frustration with the Green Party. Like the Green Party, they ran Nader, right? Old ass zombie Ralph Nader, right? They ran Stein, right? Like, and they got like 1 million votes a couple times. But where's the momentum? Where's the? If the Green Party put their effort into organizing at the local level, in local elections, if Olympia, this dumb liberal city, could elect a Green to the Port Commission, like that's where it starts. It just in general, I think we all pay way more attention to national politics than we should. Like what's happening at the national level is really, really crazy, but state politics matters. And I know from stats that basically 60% of Americans can't name their legislator. Right now, somebody's like, oh, dang, don't call on me because I don't know mine, right? Right? And, like, local politics is where our organization effort needs to go. The abortion law that was passed where a rapist can sue the mother if they have an abortion of the baby created by rape wasn't passed through the U.S. Congress. That was passed through a state legislature. And over the last 8 years, the left has been like, we have the White House. And they've gone to sleep. Like, where's protest been for the last 8 years? Barack Obama created a war in Libya. Barack Obama used drones at a higher level than George Bush, and the left went. Meanwhile, while the left was doing that, the right was organizing and agitated and took away over 1,000 legislative seats at the state level. What did they do with those seats? They've cultivated the next crop of conservative politicians who are going to be running for Congress in 2020. They also have codified their control over state legislatures through gerrymandering, right? Like 36 states allow partisan redistricting, which leads to gerrymandering. Well, what happens? You gerrymander, you create a safe district. Safe districts produce more radical candidates. When they get to DC, they have no impetus to compromise, and that leads to dysfunction in politics. But the left just let that happen. They were asleep at the switch. It's funny because like I came here and did a whole thing about like Trump and dangerous times, but like in my heart, the dangerous times are in Washington State. Jay Inslee finishes his second term in 2020. Dave Reichert is a Republican congressperson on the east side of King County who has won elections for over a decade in King County. If Dave Reichert decides to run for governor, Like Bob Ferguson, the AG, is making a nice little like boom anti-Trump thing right now. But up until Ferguson, like Reichert could walk into the governor's mansion. Washington State, blue state, hasn't voted for Republicans since Reagan '84, is on the precipice of having a Republican governor. We already have a Republican legislature in the Senate, and like the majority in the House is like 1 or 2 seats. Like that local politics is what matters. Because here's the thing. If we look at American politics and look at political history, the biggest periods of change happened under unified government. And so in the Reconstruction era, all the Democrats in the South are out of government. The Republicans amend the Constitution 3 times. Okay? Under Roosevelt with the New Deal, Roosevelt has massive congressional majorities, and he passes the New Deal, he passed Social Security, all the WPA programs. Under Johnson, he has unified government, strong majorities in Congress. He creates the Great Society programs, Medicare, Fair Housing Act, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act. Trump right now has unified government, some of the largest majorities in over 30 state legislatures. The Republicans are 1 state legislature away from being able to amend the Constitution. And so I would say, in this very long answer to your question, our hope isn't in third parties. Our hope is in nominating a progressive who shares our values to the Democratic Party at the national level, and then working our asses off at the local level to make sure that we're electing and nominating viable candidates and being out and being vocal and being involved in politics. Because so many of my friends are like, oh man, I can't wait till 2020. 2020, 2018, fam. The midterms are coming up. And here's the thing is, conservative voters show up to midterms and liberals don't. And so how are we as a community of scholars, community of learners, community of like-minded people? And by the way, that's the best thing about being at Evergreen. Like I can stand here and I assume that the vast majority of this room understands that racism is a systemic issue and not human relations. And that's why it's always good to come home to here, right? Some of you are like, wait, I don't believe that. But the rest of you do. Great. Like, how can we as a community help identify people at the local level and then build them up to the national level? Like my congressman back in Tacoma, Derek Kilmer, right? So Kilmer's on the Appropriations Committee right now. He started off in the state legislature about 15 years ago. How do we identify the Derek Kilmers who are in our community, get them to the state legislature, and then get them to Congress? You don't need to control the White House to get what you want, right? And I don't think we're going to control the White House through a third party. The opposite of everything I'm doing right now. I would say whoever's doing the talking is doing the thinking. And if you're a teacher in front of the room and you're just yammering on, then you're lifting all the cognitive weight. I heard somebody tell a story, and it's dumb, but it's kind of true. Like the best teachers are PE teachers. Because they say, we're going to climb a rope. This is the rope. Watch me climb the rope. Now you climb the rope. I'm over here. Right? But like what teachers do, other teachers do is say, this is a rope. Let's discuss the etymology of a rope. The word rope sounds like it's this, it's this. Like if I'm yammering on, right, I'm doing all the weight. I'm lifting all the weight. And so like my goal in my classroom is to shut up. I basically, I've had people come into a time study. In my classroom, it's 60% students, 40% me. I pose a question, turn and talk to your neighbor. I walk around the room and listen to the conversation. And then whatever I want to say, I listen for a student saying it, and I'm like, okay. Hey, Amanda, can you share out what you were just saying to the whole group, please? Right? And then students are hearing Amanda's voice. Amanda's over there, by the way, being shy. Thanks, Amanda. I love I have 4 former students here, and 2 of them came late, just like in high school. But anyway, Amanda, under the bus you go. Amanda shares out, right? Amanda shares out. And then I say across the room, hey, Tracy, could you paraphrase what Amanda just said? And now I'm forcing them to be active listeners in the conversation, right? I think one of the most fascinating things to do is like watch teachers who repeat themselves time after time. If I'm repeating myself to you, I'm conditioning you to not listen to me. I'm saying to you, you don't have to listen to me the first time, so I'll say it 5 times, right? So that's why when I want the room to quiet down, I say thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm not going to walk around going, okay, guys, which is in general neutral, hey, y'all, okay. I just, thank you, and then wait. the most important thing for a teacher to do sometimes is to just shut up, right? And provide space for kids to think. And then the other thing is wait time, right? Like teachers ask a question and then want a response immediately. Like complex thoughts take a while to formulate. So it's ask the question, okay, y'all, private reasoning time, think about it. Think about it. Think about it. Now turn and talk to your neighbors. And that's only 10 seconds, and maybe you might want more time than that, but that's giving students time for their thoughts to germinate and kind of flourish. And then you'll get more complex answers. The last thing I would say is ask why. Why? And like, I'll do this about once a week with a kid. I'm like, why? Da-da-da-da-da. Why? Da-da-da-da-da. Why? And they're like, damn it, because. I'm like, no, why? Right? Like, why? And as you ask the why, they're deepening their understanding, they're thinking, they're reflecting, they're making connections, they're bringing in past information, they're just grinding and grinding and grinding and grinding. All right. We all hold prejudices, right? Like, thank you for that head nod. My God, yes. We all hold prejudices, right? Is there a path to victory by acknowledging your prejudices and then engaging some conversation about theirs? Yeah. Like, that might be a path to victory. Everybody has to figure out, like, what works for them. Like, I'm 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, and have a giant beard. So, like, the things that I do aren't going to work for you, right? You mentioned that you're a privileged white person. You can engage in conversations in spaces that, like, I can't. And so if you think that your strategy is a way that is going to convince people to your side, then like by all means. I can only say what my understanding is. And you know what? In 2 years, I might not believe this, right? When I'm 40, I might be singing a totally different tune. Like I should honestly, because we should all be growing, right? If I'm giving the exact same talk in 3 years, that means A, I've made no progress, and B, like I haven't thought about my rhetoric. Now, to your point about this is not normal, there's an interesting argument about, is America a nation of laws or a nation of, men is the wrong term, but it's the term used in the conversation, okay? So the question is America held together by the Constitution and federal and state laws, or is America held together by our common agreements and and the norms of political discourse? We're gonna find out, right? Like, we're going to find out over the next 4 and possibly 8 years if we're a nation of laws or a nation of men. There's some behaviors that are happening at the national level and at the local level. And actually, it's worse at the local level. Like that whole thing that happened in North Carolina after the election was crazy, right? So much of what we're seeing is abnormal for like the post-World War II, like American period of economic growth and prosperity. But if we go back to the 1800s, like dudes got caned on the floor of Congress, right? Like Alexander Hamilton died in a duel, right? And so like, thank you, right? Like, so like what is normal? I don't know. The environmental students here, like there's this idea of like environmental change being generational. And so like you don't notice the deforestation because within your lifetime, it's kind of like always been like that, or happened very slowly. You don't notice there's fewer salmon in the river because in your lifetime, but if your grandparents showed up at their birth and looked, they'd be like, what the hell happened? I think in politics it's that way too. Like what's normal shifts, right? We can look at American history and say, what's happening right now is completely within like one standard deviation of American history. We can look and say, Japanese internment, Alien Sedition Act, Jim Crow. This is America. We can also look at like Eisenhower and like the idealized version of the Republican Party and say, this is totally unnormal. Like I don't know. I'm not sure if there is a normal in a country that's 200 years old, right? If there is a normal in a country with 330 million people, and if there's a normal in a country that has so much geographic diversity and differences, right? Like I always, there's a book out there, 9 Nations of North America, one of the most fascinating books out there. Basically the idea that like Seattle and Phoenix don't belong in the same country, right? And Seattle and Miami sure the hell don't belong in the same country, right? And so like, we're having a moment that's terrifying right now. But for communities of color and for women and for almost everybody who's not white, male, and wealthy, all of American history has been terrifying. And so if we cling to this idea of normal, are we really just clinging to what we were accustomed to in the past? At the same time, though, I think there's validity to the normal argument, because the normal argument allows you to go to somebody who's a moderate Republican and say, this isn't the party of Nixon, this isn't the party of Reagan, this isn't the party of Bush, we've departed from the normalcy of the Republican Party. And so, like, it's a rhetorical tactic that has utility, but, like, I don't think it's a guiding philosophy. Our goal shouldn't be normalcy, our goal should be justice, right? And so, like, that's my guidepost. Now, will I use the normalcy thing, like, in conversation as rhetoric? Hell yeah, because it works, right? But, like, it doesn't work with everybody. And so, like, I would just say, like, I'm a principled person, but also I can compromise like right? And it's like having your tool belt and knowing, like, well, for Uncle Jim, for Uncle Ken, I'm gonna use this, right? But for Mom, I'm gonna use this. And for Doug, I'm gonna use this, right? And knowing which of your tactics and which one of those work. One of the arguments that I go with when I'm arguing with conservative people is like I boost like the patriotic aspect of my rhetoric. And so like when I talk about law enforcement and like police violence, my whole point is that I believe in police and I believe their job is to protect and serve, which is why I'm so bothered by the idea that like rogue officers are allowed to use violence against marginalized communities with no consequence or repercussion. And so I'm actually making an argument on behalf of police, the good police, against the action of the bad police. In the same way, I believe that the 14th Amendment of the Constitution is basically the most sacred promise, the most meaningful promise that any group of people has ever made to anybody else. And so I don't buy into the we all bleed red, whatever. But what I will say is that like America as a nation is built on some foundational values. And among those foundational values are, and start quoting your, John Locke, start quoting your Madison and Hamilton. And like, there's something about certain conservatives, you're like Hamilton and Madison, they're like, yeah. And you're like, whatever, man, right? But the flip side is that like Barack Obama got to the presidency based on a speech in 2004 when he said, there's no red America, there's no blue America, there's one America. And so like that argument is trite, but it has cachet with some people, right? And so again, it's back to that tool belt. Like you have a set of skills, like who's your audience? It is trite to you. It is trite to me. But like somebody might believe in that nonsense. And so like if they believe in that nonsense, if I gotta spit nonsense, y'all, you should see the thing I do in my classroom to teach stuff, right? If I gotta spit nonsense and rap a song and do a gesture to get a kid to learn, then so be it. In the same way, if I'm talking dopey platitudes to convince somebody, then like, line me up to be a dope, right? But that's 37-year-old me. 25-year-old me is like, but I read and Chomsky said, and like, but what has that gotten me? Well, just one of the things that we have to do is we have to change the narrative at the state, local, and national level about schools. Schools are kind of interesting because if you ask the average parent, that's putting it too simple. 80% of Americans have very favorable views of their school, where their kid is. But at the system as a whole, their views are around 50%. Much in the same way that Congress's approval ratings are at like 13%, but 94% of congressmen get reelected. So there's some disconnects and some dissonance there. One of the things we have to do is like we have to celebrate the successes that we have in public education. More kids are graduating high school right now, not number-wise, but percentage-wise, than any point in American history. And there's college-qualified, highly educated young people coming out of every university in America produced out of our public schools. At the same time, as we're at like 85% graduation rates, universally that 15%, school to school to school, are the same marginalized kids. Students of color, students of poverty, immigrant students. And so we have to simultaneously celebrate the successes of public education while advocating for the change that needs to happen within the system. The thing is that like change takes money. if you're at a high poverty school or a low income school, you're going to have students who have a lack of stability and predictability in their life. And when a kid's life's in chaos, waking them up at 7:30 in the morning saying, hey, go to calculus, like, come the hell on, right? Like, you can't focus on calculus if you don't know where to sleep at night. And so it's understanding that and thinking about how can we bring to bear social services and support service for students. The most frustrating thing for me right now is like the argument over the budget in the legislature, because the Republicans right now have a proposal to increase school funding by making $1.4 billion of cuts kind of somewhere over here, and somewhere over here is going to be mental health services. Well, gee, the schools that have the low-income students from low-income communities actually need those mental health services, so you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and you're actually, it's a zero-sum game. And so it's how can we articulate what the needs of schools are, how can we advocate for schools, and how can we advocate for policies in order to create the schools that our kids need to attain and are worth believing in. And so for you and your social network, that may be different than me, right? So whatever your sphere of influence is, whoever the people you're talking to about, I gave a talk to realtors about 2 months ago. And so basically all across the nation, any tax increase, realtors say no to. Particularly a tax that's on B&O, because that's going to increase the transaction cost for them as realtors. I talked to realtors about how education and real estate, right? And now there's a cadre of realtors in Seattle who are pushing back against the Washington State Realtor Association about their stance on the budget. What networks do you have? What groups do you belong to? Who are your people in your circle who you can persuade about the importance of education and the importance of investing in our neediest kids? Like we all have like our network, right? Like, who do you know? Who's an advocate? Who can you talk to? Who can you have conversations with? The other thing I would say is that the vast majority of adults who don't have kids never go in schools. Like, go visit a school. They're kind of dope. Like, I work in a building with 1,800 kids who are all hormonal and crazy and smell kind of funny, but like, they're awesome. And like, I watch them learn, grow, and develop. I think if adults in the community actually went to schools and sat in classrooms and saw education happening, it would revolutionize the way they view schools. The other thing I'll say is teachers love when guests come in their classroom. Because if I'm teaching, right, and an adult walks in, all the kids are like, whose dad is that? Does he know my dad? Does he know my mom? And they all sit up straight, right? Like, it's great, like having an audience in. And when community members come in schools, they see what's happening in the classroom. That allows them to advocate for the schools and advocate for what's happening from firsthand experience. The answer is nope. Like honestly, so I talked earlier about like acting locally and thinking about the legislature, but like that's the school board is the first election for a ton of people, and what often happens is people go school board, city council, legislature, and then. The school board in your district has more influence what happens in your kids' lives than Betsy DeVos does. The school board sets policy, hires and fires superintendents, determines. Has influence on curricular choices. Like, no, school board elections, and you're absolutely right, I'm remiss in mentioning this, school board elections are some of the most important elections in our country, and okay, fewer than 60% of the people in the country can name their legislator. Man, can't nobody name the school board members. Like, and the thing is, like, school members are unsung heroes, because, like, legislators, it's a part-time job. School board members do that stuff for free, right? Like, that's crazy. That's crazy. Like, I'm not here for free. Like, that's crazy. Right? And so, but we don't pay attention to school board elections because we're busy, Snapchat, whatever. So, like, to answer your question, your question is there anything more important than a school board? No. So I said earlier on the most important in-school factor impacting student achievement is the effectiveness of teachers in the classroom. the effectiveness of a teacher in the classroom is driven by relationships. Students buy into the teacher before they buy into the content and the subject matter. And so what has happened at Lincoln High School is that we've had an intentional conversation as a staff about how can we build and cultivate relationships with students that are meaningful, ongoing relationships. In addition to that, having meaningful, ongoing, and by the way, relationships doesn't mean that all my students love me and we're all goody, and like we hang out. Like, no, I'm a villain to a lot of my students, right? But they know that I love them. And I end class every day by saying, I love you all, some more than others. Where's the lie, though? Chairs in and good day. And my students believe that because it's true, right? And so there's like a kind of cliche saying, people learn from people they love. If I'm able to cultivate a relationship with my students, they're willing to listen to me and learn from me. And so somebody could come into my classroom with the exact same strategies that I'm using, but if they lack that relationship, they're not going to have the same outcomes that I have. Because that relationship allows me to establish trust and rapport with my students, and that they respond to me. And so I would say there's been a building-wide effort about relationship cultivation. The other thing that we've done is that we've invested money and resources in like family support. And so now we have a full-time person in our building whose job it is to meet students' life needs. So Paul this morning, I'm like, Paul, you are squinting at the board like I have never seen. And he's like, I don't have my glasses. Paul, I haven't seen your glasses in weeks. I lost my glasses. Paul, see me after class. Paul, go see Miss Ha. Miss Ha's gonna help you get glasses. D, you've been wearing that same sweater for a minute now. Are things okay at home? No. But he's only gonna talk to me about it because we have a relationship, right? So what's going on? Well, we're living in a hotel right now. Is everything okay? We're okay, but like we need this, this, and this. D, go see Ms. Ha. Ms. Ha is like, here's a Fred Meyer gift card for your family. You can use it to buy gas. Here's some of this. We have a backpack program where like before breaks and before weekends, a lot of our kids basically go home with a backpack full of food, right? Like, I'm talking on a college campus. A lot of us taking psychology classes, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like if your basic life needs aren't met, then like the cognitive development isn't gonna happen. And so what we've tried to do is we try to meet our students' life needs. Here's what happens. School becomes a resource. And it becomes a place where they come to so they can get actual help. And in the process of feeling loved and getting help, they actually learn some stuff, right? Like I personally and my wife have paid out thousands of dollars in, hey, let's fill our drawer full of snacks. Kids come to me, hey, Bowling, I'm hungry. Grab a granola bar, sit in your chair, let's go, right? My wife and a couple of the teachers and I do a thing called the Alumni Support Tour, where we get in a car and we do a 600-mile round trip around Washington State and visit our alumni at universities. So we've pushed these kids, go to college, go to college, go to college, and they're like, Bowling, I'm Black and Pullman. I'm like, fam, I know. And so we get in the car and we drive to Ellensburg and spend the night and dap up our kids, right? And we post this on our classroom social media so our students who we have see it and they know we're invested in them for the long term. And then we drive to Pullman and visit godforsaken Wazoo, right? For real, man, Wazoo fam. And then we get out of Pullman as quickly as possible and go to Spokane and visit our kids at Whitworth and Gonzaga. And then we zip pack across the state on that Sunday. That's 600 miles. That's 4 teachers. That's about $1,000 out-of-pocket expenses. But we've done it the last 3 years. Like, that's love, right? If you love on kids and invest in kids, and you make sure they're safe and their needs are met, they'll rise to the occasion. The other thing I'll say, like more like pedagogical, like nuts and bolts things is we've expanded our school day. And so our students have a seminar class, and that seminar class is a class where they get academic advising and homework time. We do a thing basically called academic acceleration, where like if you can walk, talk, and chew gum, you're probably in an AP class. Now we put them in an AP class that's like here, right? But we give them the academic support they need to thrive in the class. I don't care if they pass the exam. Most of my students don't pass the exam. But they're better off being exposed to more rigorous curriculum. And they're able to survive that class because they have a structured hour within their day where they can work on their homework and sit with other students in the same classes and get help. And so I would say some of the biggest changes we've made, teacher move here, the recap now, invest in relationships, meeting students' basic needs, and providing academic support within the school day. Education, well, the reason why it's underfunded is we have a 200-year-old constitution that was written in the time of horses, right? Like, honestly, like, we abide by these rules where a federal government was created before electricity. Like, come the hell on, right? And so that's why there's no national, like, it's stupid. There's no national role in education, right? But, like, our country was created before the common school. Now, to get to, like, the real nuts and bolts of it, Americans want more government than they're willing to pay for. And so there's a downward pressure on taxation. And here in Washington State, we have the most progressive tax policy in the entire country. And so poor people in Washington State pay a higher percentage of their income than poor people anywhere else in the country, which means there's tax fatigue, which means whenever there's a chance to vote for taxes, they vote nah, right? Here's what happens is if you're a wealthy community, you insulate your community and keep your tax revenue local within your own schools, your own kids, your own districts, because your property values are higher. If you're a low-income community, in order to generate the revenue that the wealthy community has, their houses are valued at more money, you would need to basically chalk up the tax rates to like 18, 20% property taxes. So a house in Bellevue let's say a neighborhood in Bellevue, right, where like the average home's worth $400,000. They can go property tax rate of 1%, 2%, and generate the same amount of money that like Roy or Graham could do at 18, 20%. Well, Roy and Graham aren't going to charge 18, 20% property tax rates because that's not sustainable politically, right? And so they don't. And so the wealthier schools are funded at higher levels, the rural and urban schools are funded at lower levels, and you get the inequality. Now, Massachusetts has the highest performing schools in the country. And what they do is basically a thing called funding equity. And so wealthier districts get less money from the state because they need less money from the state. And poor districts get more money from the state because they need more money from the state. At the same time, if you have special needs students, ELL students, foster care students, who are disproportionately in your lower income schools, you get more money per student in Massachusetts. That's not rocket science. You give schools that have less more, you give schools that have more less, and you give kids that need more more. But there's no lack of political will to do that in Washington State. And one of the reasons why is that the communities in Washington State who are doing the best affluently, or are most affluent, basically have insulated themselves from the inequality and fund their own schools, and so they don't really care, right? Like think about a year ago when the 405 tolls went up, the east side of King County howled and the legislature acted. When Bellevue, Redmond, and Kirkland howl, Olympia listens. Bellevue, Redmond, and Kirkland aren't howling about education because they're funding their own schools through local revenue, so they don't care. Like, there's no impetus for them to say, you know what, take more of my money and give it to kids in Toppenish. They're not going to do that. They're not going to do that. And so, what do? The state constitution says that funding education is the paramount duty of the state of Washington. The legislature got sued for not funding education in Washington State. They lost. They lost that case a decade ago. But we're just kicking the can down the road. And we're at the point now where this session, the legislature is being fined $100,000 a day for being in contempt of the court order. So, right? Like, one thing I've learned about American politics is that we respond to crises. So I mentioned those presidencies that were most like influential, right? Civil War, Great Depression, Civil Rights Movement. We're not going to have the response that we need about education until there's a crisis. But the problem with that crisis is that kids like my students in that crisis, there's going to be a period where they get hurt. And like, I don't want to end on like a grim, not hopeful note, but like that's the reality, is that we're not going to make the change that needs to happen unless there's a crisis. And in that crisis, like kids are going to be harmed. Man, that's not the way I wanted to end this. can I say this? Can I say this? Even though they're taking attendance, and that's why you showed up. As somebody who spent so much of their life being a student of the Evergreen State College, and somebody who loves what this institution means, and as somebody who in the last 24 months has met Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Bill Gates, the Chinese president Xi Jinping, being here is one of the most meaningful experiences of my adult life. And I'm super, super thankful to all of you who sat here and listened. You may not agree, but you nodded. I'll take that. That's easy, right? Who had thoughtful questions, who pushed back. Because, this is a community of learning, community of scholarship. And my babies from my school are here among you. And, I'm super glad you had me tonight, and I will come back anytime. Just thank you. Thank you.